Hello and welcome to another tutorial. I'm going to continue our discussion on compiling Java applications to native executable binary. So far we've been using terminal, and the problem with terminal and calling the native image tool is that you have to manually feed that native image the arguments that it needs. For example, the class path of your Java application, so that it knows all the dependencies, all the class files that have to be compiled to a native executable binary. And that could be tedious. So what we want to do, we want to use an IDE like Eclipse IDE, so that the IDEs, the Java IDEs, the way they do it is they organize your Java source files and then the compiled files in a manner that is known to the IDE. It knows where all your class files is. So internally, IDEs know your class path, right? The dependencies of your Java project. And now IDEs such as Eclipse IDE have a powerful tool called external tool, which means it allows you to configure using external applications like the native image tool, right? And then because we are in the IDE environment, we are in the Eclipse IDE, we can take advantage of the fact that Eclipse knows the class path. It knows which directories have the class files that are used for your application. It also knows all the dependencies of your class file. Remember that the IDEs have their own Java compiler. Usually they use the Java runtime that comes with the JDK. Now these days even Eclipse IDE comes with its own integrated Java runtime, so it doesn't have to, you don't need to install a JDK to run your Java application. Eclipse has always had its own Java compiler, so whenever you install it, it comes with the Java compiler. But it used to not have any Java runtime. It had to rely on the Java runtime that is configured on your operating system. But these days, Eclipse IDE even comes with its own Java runtime. So when you download it, it's ready to go. You don't need to install any JDK or anything. Obviously, I'm a Java enthusiast, and then I've installed lots of JDKs, JREs, and Eclipse allows you to configure the Java runtime inside the IDE, so that you tell it, hey, use JDK 18 for this Java project or JDK 17 or whatever. You don't have to use only the Java runtime that comes with the Eclipse IDE in the recent versions. But in here, I'm just going to focus on the external tool. And again, external tool allows the user to run external applications. For example, native image tool, right? Native image, let's say, for example, native image. And that's our goal here. So in the toolbar of the Eclipse IDE, when you are in the Java perspective, which means you have configured Eclipse IDE to develop Java applications. Now we know that Eclipse has the concept of perspective, and you can install or go into a C++ perspective. So it allows you to develop C++ applications, or Python perspective. So it allows you to develop Python applications. But when you select the Java runtime or Java perspective, these buttons at the toolbar are configured to run, for example, Java applications. So this green button, the play button, is whenever you run a Java application in Eclipse, it creates a run configuration, which passes the flags to your JVM or even to your Java application, those string array args for your Java application. And then there is a button that has a red suitcase here, and it's called the external tool. And what you want to do, you want to click on this arrow that next to it, it opens this menu, and then you go to external tool configurations, right? Now, if you have already created a few external tools and have used them on inside the Eclipse IDE, it shows you the most recent external tools that you have created and run. I mean, here I have native image with the GraalVM 17, and I also duplicated it and performed some experiments. But if it's the first time you click on this right arrow next to the external tool button, the list here is empty, and you click on the external tool configurations to go and create a new external tool configuration for the native image. So why use external tool in Eclipse IDE? Clearly, you can run the external application from terminal. For example, so far we've been using native image from the terminal to compile our Java application. The problem is that once your Java application becomes very complicated, very large, it has a lot of class files, lots of packages, lots of dependencies on other projects or jar files, then specifying the dependencies of your Java application for a native image becomes difficult. External tool allows you to access Eclipse's internal environment variables. So Eclipse has some internal variables that only Eclipse understands. And when you use those names at runtime, Eclipse actually replaces those names, those variables, with the actual string representation of those variables. So it's a string substitution. And you can even define your own internal environment variables for Eclipse. So Eclipse IDE is available of the path to workspace or the selected file in the tree. So for example, basically the path to workspace or selected file in the tree view, right? So if you wanna basically, so let's say you have multiple directories on your operating system that you have defined as Eclipse workspaces. Obviously, you can open up Eclipse IDE and tell them, okay, use this directory. I want to work on this workspace or the other one. But then once you change workspaces, the actual path to that workspace changes. But as long as you define your use a environment variable that represents the workspace, you don't need to change anything because Eclipse internally is aware the path to the workspace, right? And there is an environment variable called workspace underscore LOC or location, which means whenever you use that environment variable in Eclipse, Eclipse is aware of what the actual value of that variable is. Same with the tree view. So Eclipse has a package explorer or file explorer, and whenever you select something, there is an environment variable that has the full path to that selected resource or selected file, right? So Eclipse's internal variables access these variables using $sign and then curly braces and the name of the environment variable. The entire expression will be substituted by Eclipse IDE at runtime. And this will be executed in a separate shared process. So for the external tool, if you want to pass some arguments or flags to your external tool, let's say native image, we want to specify the class path or the working directory. Remember, in terminal, even in terminal, when every time we launch the native image, Graal home bin directory native image, we are inside some working directory, and I will show you that the same concept applies to this external tool configuration. You want to tell Eclipse where to run this external tool from, so which directory is the working directory, and the working directory is basically the current directory, the dot, right? Dot means if I tell it -cp dot, it means the current working directory. So that's the first thing that you have to tell to the external application, right? What is the working directory, and Eclipse takes care of it. And then some flags, for example, -cp, you want to tell it put all the dependencies to this argument. So you want to tell Eclipse, hey, take care of adding all the, let's say I have lots of jars as dependencies to my Java application, and I want to tell native image that all of those jars have to be on this class path argument variable. Obviously trying to manually write them down, let's say directory 1 colon directory 2, remember the class path separator is colon. It's very tedious, whereas inside the Eclipse IDE, Eclipse is already aware of all the dependencies of your Java application, so there is no problem with that. All you have to do, you have to use something like an environment variable in Eclipse that has that says, for example, project underscore class path, and at runtime, when you run this external tool on your Java project, Eclipse replaces this environment variable, which is an Eclipse variable, internal variable, with the correct string representation, which has all the basically all the dependencies of your class path, right? So this is the power of this external tool in Eclipse IDE, right? So here I have listed all the internal environment variables. So here is a few important of them that you probably end up using most of the time. So first of all, let's look at this list. I'm going to go through this quickly. Active underscore core underscore build dir, build files, build project, build type, bundle location, cdt path entry var. This is the C++ for the C++ plugin. Config description, config name, container location, container name, container path, current date. Easy Shell, Eclipse Home. Remember, when you launch Eclipse, Eclipse also runs on top of a JVM. So it also has this environment variable Eclipse Home that tells you where is the home directory of the Eclipse, right? EE Home, env var, environment val, file prompt, file URI. Let me zoom out. Let's zoom back in. So file URI, folder prompt, git branch. So if one of your Java projects is actually a git repository, you can basically inquire some of the environment variables that are associated with git inside Eclipse. Git directory, git repo relative path, git work tree, Java extensions regex, Java type name. This is the most important one. This returns the fully qualified name of a class file. Password prompt, project class path. This is very, very important when we configure an external tool to run a native image, because we have to tell it all the directories are on the class path, all the dependencies of our Java project, and all you have to do is use this environment variable inside Eclipse. Project location, project name, project path, resource location, resource name, resource path, selected resource location, selected resource name, selected resource path. Now, the difference between resource and this Java type name here is that resource is the actual file. So if you click on the file in the source file in the package explorer, it's been considered a resource. But if you select that Java file and use the Java type name, Eclipse actually returns the fully qualified name of the class file. Remember, native image runs or operates on the class files, not Java source files. Selected text, source lookup, Java agent, a string prompt, system, system path, system property. And these are used if you want to inquire some of the Java system properties like JVM properties. When you launch Eclipse, obviously it runs on top of a JVM. That JVM has been already configured, so it has some system properties. Workspace location, this is very important. That returns the full path to your workspace. Workspace underscore project underscore locations. And this is all the locations that are associated with your workspace. And again, the ones that I've highlighted in a box here: workspace location, project location, name, class path, resource name path, Java type name. These are the most important ones, right? So before going into the details, what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump into Eclipse IDE and quickly show you the meaning of these environment variables. So let's head to Eclipse. This is my package explorer, right? And if I click on any file in the package explorer, remember, you can have packages, Java packages, or you can have non-package directories in your Java project. So to the Eclipse IDE, this is not a package. For example, this test directory is not a package, right? It's just some directory that is not, and anything that is not a package is not going to be added on the class path of your Java file. But nevertheless, inside a directory, you can have Java files, class files, text file, any type of file. And in the package explorer, when you click on any of these are called a resource. Now, what this means is that if I go to external tool configuration, right? Now, I have created a native image 17, and I will walk you through this in the next lecture. But let's look at this. Let's call it dummy, right? All right, so we shouldn't run this. So let's go back to this arrow and let's look at the dummy, right? So the way you do it, all right, let's actually delete all of the old ones. Yeah. So the way you do it, you go to this external tool configuration and then click the program, right? You want to run a program as an external tool, and you press on this. Press the new configuration button to create a configuration of the selected type. So you click on this, you are creating a new configuration. Now, obviously, you can delete it, you can duplicate it if you want to quickly change something. This button is for running, and you can filter them, or you can expand or non-expand. So let's delete the previous one. So export launch configuration, you can, for example, export these or filter them, filter configuration type, etc. But right now we just created a new configuration. You can give it a name. This name is just something that you can easily distinguish. Let's say dummy external tool, right? And what kind of application do I want to run as external tool? Let's say let's go back here to our terminal. And we know that if I type ls, it's going to it's a command line application and it lists all the files and directories. But where is this ls? It's in bin ls, right? So instead of typing ls, you can say bin ls and it still works. So I'm going to copy this, go back to Eclipse IDE, and then bin ls. So I want to tell it run the ls tool, and then working directory. This application is going to be run, but just like terminal, when we run it, you have to be inside some working directory, right? So let's tell the Eclipse we want to run it in our Java native image. So there are different ways. First of all, there is this variable that immediately lists all the internal variables of Eclipse, and you can quickly search for something. Let's say project basically path or project location. Returns the absolute file system. So there is a description that immediately tells you what's going on. Returns the absolute file system path of a resources project. So remember, I create a Java project. Whatever file that I select and select, this project location returns the path to the project, Java project that this file belongs to. So let's select this, and you see Eclipse replaces it with the internal representation of the environment variable, $, curly braces, and then the name of the variable. At runtime, this will be replaced by the string representation of this project location. And again, if you select different files in different projects, this will work. So Eclipse automatically substitutes this variable with the correct string representation. And for the argument, we're not going to pass anything, right? So let's apply. And let's run this. Right now I selected this terminal. All right, so what I forgot to do, let's go back to our external tool, and you see there are other stuff that again I will show you in the future lectures, but for now there is a build before launch. I'm going to unselect it. Build means if there are also other projects in the workspace, what to do. Do you want to recompile all the files? For now we're just running ls. We want to list the directories or all the files inside the project directory. So I don't want to build. Refresh, we don't want to refresh anything. Build, I will cancel the build. We're not defining any environment variables. And the common, we can allocate console so that see the output when we run this native image. And as you can see, I select a file, I run my external tool, dummy external tool, and it actually runs the command bin ls, right? ls is the command line tool, and it runs it on the working directory. And I told it to run it on basically the project location, right? The project that this file belongs to. So regardless of which file or which resource, any directory or any file is a resource. If I run it, it's going to run the external tool bin ls inside this directory. So it's equivalent to open a terminal here in this directory and say / bin ls, or just say ls. All right. So this was the quick introduction to this external tool. In the future lectures, I will go in more depth about how to actually configure this external tool further. What is the build or tab? There was a build tab here. What does it mean? There is a refresh tab, environment. There is a command here. What can we do about it? And again, in the arguments, basically what arguments we can pass to our external tool. So when you, again, to summarize, when you launch a Java application, let's say when you launch an application in the terminal, you write the full path or the relative path or just the name of the application. And we saw that if you just type the name of the application, the terminal and the operating system, they search into the path environment variables, right? But let's say we type the full name, bin ls, right? And then you want to tell the external tool, when you run a application in the terminal, you always run it inside some working directory. So this working directory represents the current directory that I'm inside, which is this directory, Java native image, right? When I launch this application, which is ls, to list all the files. And then ls can take arguments, -l, -a, etc., right? So these arguments actually represent those. I can say -la, apply, and then run. And as you can see, any resource, any file, anything that I select and run my external tool, it's going to run it on run the ls-la inside this working directory, which is Java native image. So it tells me current directory .ds .classpath. These are the eclipses, and these are all the directories inside the project directory, right? App, bin, example, run SA, run me, src, test, right? So I hope you understand this. In the next lecture, I will go into more details. So please stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.